Hello, I'm Mr. Hadush, your physics teacher. There is no single way that all scientists use to make some scientific investigations. One scientist may use his own way, the other one may use another way. So we cannot have one way to make a scientific research. There is no single way by which scientists follow to make some kind of investigations or to make some research. But scientists, scientists put as a guideline that allow them to make some kind of investigations. These are like the ways or kind of rules, you can call them rules, by which all scientists commonly use. The first step they have to do is they have to make careful observation on what they are doing. The first step in any scientific investigation is making a careful observation on what they are going to do. So to make any kind of good scientific investigation, the scientist has to follow these steps. The first step is making careful observation. We have to observe. The first step is what? Observation. We have to carefully look at. When we say observation, we mean that carefully, we have to carefully look at what we are going to do. Once we carefully look at and collect data from what we are investigating, the next step will be we formulate a theory, or we formulate a hypothesis. Formulate and objectively test the hypothesis. We test it. But how are we going to test it? We test our data, the data that we collect. In our first step, we have to check and hypothesize by making an experiment. We have to make a hypothesis, or we have to test our hypothesis by making an experiment. So the second step is testing the hypothesis by making an experiment. We can't make a hypothesis just simply as it is. We have to prove it by an experiment. But what's the meaning of hypothesis? Let's see what's the meaning of hypothesis. Hypothesis is an explanation that is based on prior scientific research or observation that can be tested. This is very important. So it's like, our experiment, the data that we collect has to be hypothesized. We have to carefully explain based on the research, based on the observation. So hypothesis is what? Carefully explain based on the prior research, the previous research. The third step is we collect data in the first step. We collect data, then the data that we collect, we prove it by an experiment. Then we interpret, we collect data, we hypothesize, and we just make the experiment and put it in a table form. After that, after we make an experiment, we interpret the result. Here what we have to do is we interpret the result. Interpreting the result that we get by an experiment. We interpret. So we collect data. The data that we collect has to be proved by an experiment, and the experiment that we are making has to be put in a table form. And finally, once we put in a table form, we interpret. We give it careful interpretation, or we revise the hypothesis here. If it's not the way we expect, we can revise our hypothesis. Finally, once we interpret, we revise. If we think that it's correct, we arrive at a final step. That step is called conclusion, or we set a law. So after going through these all steps, finally we'll arrive at a conclusion that can be evaluated by other scientists. When you say conclusion, it is something that can be tested or evaluated by others. It will be checked down or evaluated by other researchers or scientists. As I told you before, hypothesis is like an explanation that is based on the prior research. Here what you have to do is, when scientists are making a research or making an experiment, they have to use a model. When they are making an experiment, they have to use a model. And what's the meaning of model? A model is a plot or a pattern or a plane or a representation or a description that is designed to show the structure or working of an object. How does it works? It tells us a model is a representation that shows us how a given object or how a given model works. How this shows how it works. What are the materials inside? What are the necessary things that we need to make the model? So that's a model. So generally, models help us guide our experimental design. If you want to make an experiment, we have to start is by preparing a model. So it is like a guideline. It helps as a guide for our experimental design, for the design that we are going to put. Or models can help build a hypothesis. To make a hypothesis, we have to prepare a model. So from the model that we prepare, we can build up a hypothesis. We can prepare or build up or set up a hypothesis. And the other thing that we have to is the meaning of system. What is a meaning of what? The meaning of system. What's a system? A system is a set of particles or interacting components considered to be distinct physical entity. Separate. Distinct means separate. For the purpose of our study. So, for the purpose of what we are going to do, we need to have a system or a set of interacting particles. Or components. So, like, we prepare a system, we have a model, now we are going to make an experiment. And that kind of experiment is called controlled experiment. What's the meaning of controlled experiment? What's a controlled experiment? A controlled experiment is an experiment that tests only one factor at a time. See, in this case, we can't test many factors at a time. We just test one factor at a time. Because we are controlling. A controlled experiment is an experiment that tests one factor at a time by using a comparison of the control groups with an experimental group.